Let everyone be struck with fear, the whole world tremble, and the heavens exult when Christ, the Son of the living God, is present on the altar in the hands of a priest. O wonderful loftiness and stupendous dignity! O sublime humility! The Lord of the universe, God and the Son of God, so humbles himself that he hides himself for our salvation under an ordinary piece of bread. See the humility of God, brothers, and pour out your hearts before him. Humble yourselves that you may be exalted by him. Hold back nothing of yourselves for yourselves, that he who gives himself totally to you may receive you totally. That prayer is attributed to St. Francis of Assisi, who himself was an extreme example of humility. Francis, as most people know, had a very profound conversion experience. He went into the church of San Damiano. He had an encounter with the risen Christ in the crucifix as he was kneeling there praying, and he had heard, "Rebuild my church." And Francis at first took this quite literally, and he wanted to make the church very beautiful again. When he told the Pope this, though, the Pope said, "No, I think this means more than what you think it means. I think you are meant to reform the church." And he certainly did that. He created this religious way of life that was more mendicant, to where they actually went out and did things. Up until this point, most people's encounter, with exception of a few other orders, was monks kind of lived in their monastery, and you would see them when they came into town to get things or whatnot. So that kind of sets up who Francis was. But Francis, because of the extreme humility that he had, he never saw himself as truly worthy enough. And that prayer certainly embodies that thought process. Let everyone be struck with fear, the whole world tremble. And really it should, because when we behold the Eucharist on the altar, we are beholding our God. We're not beholding a symbol. We're not beholding a representation of it or something acting in the place of. That is why the church has this concept of transubstantiation, in that it's no longer bread but the body. It's no longer wine but the blood. That's why we say we don't receive the bread, we receive the body or the corpus, or we receive the blood. Right? I came across this prayer again today online. I had a few minutes to kind of just poke around in between some other work. And EWTN used to always use this when they would start Mass. And if you ever watched Mass on EWTN, depending on the day, and I guess probably the mood of the person that is producing it at that time, they might have a different prayer. This was one that they had for a long time, and it was always my favorite one to hear because of the wording of it. Oh, sublime humility, the Lord of the universe, God and the Son of God, so humbles himself that he hides himself for our salvation. So here you have Francis paying homage to Aquinas and his way of thinking about things. St. Thomas Aquinas referred to the sacrament as a veil that allowed us to see God in his glory, and certainly that's what it is. God wanted to stay with us forever in a way that was tangible to our limited, and I do say limited, human senses, but one that we could still behold. Because to be honest, if we beheld God in his full glory, it would overwhelm us. Even Moses, when he goes up on the mountain, he comes back down and he's substantially changed. His face is white and his hair is white from it. When the apostles see the transfigured Christ and Christ in his true glory, they hide themselves, and even so much as a whisper from the Almighty causes Elijah to hide himself under his cloak. So this isn't something that we just don't take seriously. Now, where am I going with all of this rambling? To kneel or not to kneel? That is the question. Often I will kneel through the whole of the consecration, but I'll stand up. Now, as somebody who's adding to the music at Mass, sometimes it's just not as practical for me to kneel the whole time, especially if I have an instrument, or if I'm the cantor for that day. Kneeling is itself a sign of humility, because it brings the person giving the sign lower than what they are actually kneeling to. And so I think it can be, we need to get back in the habit of this at Mass. I think that certainly it's kind of, you see everybody kneel, you kneel. But if it's not necessarily convenient for you to kneel, maybe go out on a limb and do it. Because if we truly believe that this is the immortal God, the Lord of the universe, the Son of the living God, God from God, light from light, true God from true God, consubstantial with the Father, meaning he is the same. If we truly believe that, then we would never want to get up from there. And to be honest, and I say this with as much humility as I can in trying to get this statement up, it's hard for me to want to get up. Mostly because I'm not worthy to be there to begin with. I'm certainly not ever worthy to receive. That's why we have the Domine non sum dignus. Lord, I am not worthy that you should enter under my roof. Isn't it wonderful that that prayer actually is attributed to, at the time, a pagan, a Roman soldier who later on in tradition we hold to be St. Longinus, the same centurion who stands at the cross and says, truly this man was the Son of God. If you notice, I've gone from, let all mortal flesh keep silence, which is one of my favorite tones, to the great Tantum Ergo chant, which if you go to benediction, you might hear that, as well as back to my favorite arrangement of this song called from Edward Barstow, Let All Mortal Flesh Keep Silence, and in fear and trembling stand. It's hard for us to truly say as Catholics that we really believe that this is Christ present in the sacrament if we're not doing things that demonstrate that. And that includes falling on our knees when we see the sacrament, genuflecting to a tabernacle, not just a nod of the head. Somewhere in the 80s, we made it acceptable that we only needed to give a slight bow. Well, that's kind of like saying, hey, Grandpa, what's up? And then walking in the other room and not even acknowledging him. Not that I didn't have any experiences of that as a youth. But we owe more when we are in the presence of the divine. This is why it's important for churches to look the way that they look, so that we can properly be configured when we go in there, and so we understand our situation. That doesn't mean, though, that we should do these things for show. If you're in a situation where you're a minister of the altar and most of the ministers of the altar are a certain way, then yeah, it probably makes more sense for you to be in unity with them, especially if it's a portion where you are assisting perhaps the priest or the deacon in their ministry of the Mass. One thing I used to really struggle with was I wanted, not for any show for anybody else, but for my own personal connection, to know that I was showing the proper reverence for the sacrament. And in fact, that's something that has always been drilled into me as a youth. You're in church, act appropriately. In fact, I had to get all my own kids this Sunday because they came up to help me with my things off of the side altar where our musicians are, which is unofficially called the Mary altar because it's the altar where Mary is in our church, and they started goofing off, and I said, absolutely not. You are in the presence of the sacrament. And I asked them, I didn't even chastise them with that. First I said, who's in that gold box over there? Jesus. And do you think he'd appreciate you horsing around in his house? No. I'm like, all right, go over there and say penance for that. And they did it because they understood, right? So how many times do we allow ourselves some sort of penance when we become distracted, or some sort of retribution for the things that we do, which we know we're not giving God everything that we were able to give him at a given time? Cain and Abel. One sacrifice was accepted, one sacrifice was rejected. Not because there was a monetary value that was equivalent of the same, but what was actually lost. And we see that same thing with Abraham and his son. God realized that Abraham was truly losing something, and that ultimately is manifested in his only begotten son being crucified on a cross in a rather humiliating way. But that again transformed death into life for us. It conquered death. It threw down the gates of Hades, the harrowing of the gates of Hades, as it's called in patristics. So I would challenge you to think about these things and to think about, are you giving everything you can when you're at Mass? That doesn't mean you have to be slicing open your head and throwing sackcloth and ashes all over yourself, but rather a mental configuration that allows you to truly understand where you are in time and space at that moment. It's only then that you really understand what active participation really means. It's not getting to do a job at the Mass. It's not getting to do the same things that the priest is doing, or for that much even being able to necessarily speak. But it is understanding your place in the cosmos at that time. And at that moment, there is no one else except you and your God. So that's my thoughts for today. I'll leave one more time with this beautiful prayer. Let everyone be struck with fear, the whole world tremble, and the heavens exult when Christ, the Son of the living God, when Christ, the Son of the living God, is present on the altar in the hands of a priest. O wonderful loftiness and stupendous dignity, O sublime humility! The Lord of the universe, God and the Son of God, so humbles himself that he hides himself for our salvation under an ordinary piece of bread. See the humility of God, brothers, and pour out your hearts before him. Humble yourselves that you may be exalted by him. Hold back nothing of yourselves for yourselves, that he who gives himself totally you may receive you totally. Amen. And if you don't have all that time to remember that, I'll offer you my own prayer that I say before I receive. Cleanse me, O Lord, of my sin. Wash me of my iniquities. In your body keep me, in your blood constantly renew me. O Lord, open my heart and inflame my will that I may worthily receive you into my life. Be with me now and even at the hour of my death. Amen. Yep. Travel to Mass this week. Think about what I just said. Travel to adoration too. Adoration's cool to go to. Even if you don't hear anything or got anything to say, sometimes it's good just to sit in the stillness. The sublime humility of sitting in front of your God